I was rinsing a dish when the screen door creaked open. No knock, no hello, just footsteps and the scent of too much cologne. Bryce walked in like he still lived here, like he hadn't ignored my last 3 messages. He glanced around the kitchen, didn't smile. "There it is," he said, eyes landing on the trailer keys beside the fruit bowl. "Liana's outside with the kids. We'll come back tomorrow, load everything up and be out of your hair before you know it." I turned off the faucet. Out of my hair, he picked up the keys and pocketed them like they were always his. "We're taking the trailer. Perfect timing, actually. Liana's been needing a break, and the kids'll love it. And since we'll be passing Desert Bloom anyway," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I dried my hands slowly. "You're taking my trailer." Bryce chuckled like it was a misunderstanding. "Mom, come on. You don't need that. It's just sitting there. Be real. What are you going to do? Drive across the country by yourself? You'll be safer with people around." People, he meant staff. Nurses. Name tags and schedules. He didn't see the plans I'd drawn up. The maps I'd printed, routes highlighted in yellow. The list of parks I'd always wanted to see. He didn't ask. Liana honked twice from the driveway. Bryce looked toward the door, then back at me with that same half-smile he's worn since college, the one that always meant the decision had already been made. "You'll be all right," he said, already walking away. I followed him to the porch. Bryce. But he was already calling for the kids to buckle up. My trailer, clean-stocked, fueled, still stood there, unaware that by tomorrow it would be taken. And not by me. He drove off without a wave. The taillights disappeared down the street, and I was left standing in my kitchen. Hands still damp, heart suddenly hollow. I stared at the driveway for a long time. Then I walked to the drawer under the sink and opened the fireproof lockbox. The fireproof box hadn't been opened in months. I lifted the lid and ran my hand over the top folder. Everything was where it should be, copies of my title insurance registration. The trailer wasn't just mine emotionally. It was mine legally, down to the ink on every page. Beneath the papers sat the second set of keys still on the original dealership tag. I picked them up, felt their weight in my palm. I hadn't planned for betrayal, but I'd always believed in preparing for the unexpected. Not because I distrusted my son, but because I understood people change, and memory fades faster than paperwork. I laid everything out on the table and flipped through each document. Nothing was co-signed. No loopholes. Bryce could pretend all he wanted, but the truth was plain filed and notarized. The phone call to Moira was brief. We'd known each other since before Bryce was born. She didn't ask why, just listened as I dictated the change. All my estate had once gone to him by default. It no longer would. I told her to reallocate everything to the Desert Women's Relief Fund. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted my silence to mean something. After we hung up, I kept sorting through papers, organizing them into a new binder. Near the bottom of the box was an envelope I didn't recognize, at first, yellowed, slightly sealed shut. My name was written in Tom's handwriting, the slant of it softer than I remembered. I held it for a moment, thumb tracing the curve of each letter. My breath caught, then settled. I didn't open it. I slid it gently aside and turned back to the binder. There was work to do, copies to make, notes to leave, a will to sign. By sundown, the folder was complete and zipped inside my canvas travel bag. I set it by the door right next to the shoes I planned to wear when I took back what was mine. I slept lightly that night, and just before dawn, I packed the glove compartment. They didn't bother knocking. From my kitchen window, I saw them move like it was any other morning. Liana handed out juice boxes. Bryce adjusted the trailer hitch with a confidence he hadn't earned. The kids tossed in pillows and duffel bags, laughing like it was a holiday. No one looked toward the house. No one waved. I watched until the engine started. Then I picked up my phone and typed the message I'd rehearsed all night. Check the glove compartment. I didn't add anything else. Just hit send and set the phone face down on the counter. Inside that glove box, nestled between the registration and a flashlight, Bryce would find a printed copy of my updated will, a notarized document revoking the house transfer, and a one-line note in my handwriting, "You're driving stolen property." I poured a second cup of coffee. Outside, the taillights of my trailer faded down the street. I sat down and exhaled slowly, hands wrapped around the warm ceramic. 10 minutes later, the phone started buzzing. One call, then two. By the 6th, I flipped it over. By the 10th, I muted it. By the time I'd finished my coffee, there were 22 missed calls and 3 voicemails. The first one began with Bryce's voice sharp and cracking. "What the hell is this?" He'd read the will. He'd seen the title. He finally understood that I hadn't just rolled over and disappeared like he expected. I didn't delete the voicemail. I saved it. I didn't answer the calls. I wrote down each timestamp. The trailer was heading east toward the interstate, but I knew exactly where they'd be by now, somewhere past the on-ramp halfway to the state line, when reality finally caught up to arrogance. I stood and rinsed my mug. The water ran warm. Then I took out the folder and walked to the station. The precinct smelled faintly of old coffee and paperwork. Officer Darnell Ames looked up when I approached the front desk, his expression polite, but guarded the kind reserved for stories that start with my son. I gave him my name and handed over the folder I'd prepared. He motioned for me to sit, flipping through the documents one by one. "So this is about your trailer." "My trailer," I said evenly. "Purchased last month. $45,000. Paid in full." He nodded slowly. "And you're saying your son took it?" "I'm saying he entered my home, removed my property without consent, and drove away." He hesitated. "Family disputes can be tricky, ma'am. If it's shared ownership, it isn't." I slid the title toward him. My signature circled in blue ink. "You'll find no cosigner. Registration, insurance, and payment records are all under my name. You'll also find text messages and a notarized copy of a will placed inside the glove compartment of the stolen vehicle." That last part caught his attention. He read the note I'd enclosed in the folder and leaned back slightly, the skepticism shifting to quiet respect. "You're saying you told him he was driving stolen property?" I didn't say it. I wrote it down. He let out a low whistle and reached for his computer. "All right then, let's make it official." As he entered the information, I sat still, hands folded in my lap. His pen moved steadily, tapping against the desk with each new line. When he finished, he looked at me over the top of the form. "Most folks your age would have just let it go," he said. "I did," I replied. "For too many years." He nodded once and printed the report. "We'll open an investigation. If he's caught on the interstate, he'll be stopped and questioned." I took the signed copy and tucked it into my bag. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like something that couldn't be undone. Outside, the sun was sharp against the pavement. I adjusted my glasses, crossed the lot, and called Moira. The envelope came by courier, thick and official-looking, stamped with a law firm's seal. I signed for it without asking what it was. Inside, the words blurred for a moment before I could focus on them. Petition for determination of incapacity, filed by Bryce Crane. He hadn't wasted any time. Less than 24 hours after the police report, my own son was claiming I wasn't fit to manage my affairs. I set the papers on the table and just looked at them. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere between anger and disbelief, a small, tired laugh escaped me. There it was, the punishment for refusing to be quiet. I called Moira and drove to her office that afternoon. She greeted me with that measured calm of hers, took one glance at the document, and her jaw tightened. It was the same look I'd once seen on a doctor's face before bad news. "Well," she said after a moment, "he's serious. They're alleging cognitive decline and impaired judgment. They'll try to use the trailer purchase as evidence of impulsivity. He's turning my life into a case study, I said. Moira nodded. We'll respond strategically. 2 medical evaluations, 1 neurological, 1 psychological. Clean reports will close this fast. I'll also file a restraining order to stop direct contact until it's resolved. He'll have to go through me. Her pen moved across the pad, quickly decisive lines and underlines the rhythm of someone used to crisis. I watched her work, numb but steady. It'll take a few weeks, she said. In the meantime, don't engage with him. No calls, no texts. Every interaction becomes evidence. I understand. My voice sounded calm, but something inside me felt hollowed out. Moira looked up. You're taking this better than most. I'm just out of surprises, I said quietly. The betrayal isn't new, it's just louder now. She slid the papers back into a folder and clasped it shut. We'll get ahead of this, Odella. I promise. I nodded, thanked her, and left. The air outside felt heavier somehow. When I reached home, the phone was already ringing. The results came back 3 days later. Both evaluations were clean, no signs of impairment, no concerns about my judgment. The neurologist even wrote a note commending my memory retention. I tucked the letters into the same folder that held the police report, the new will, and the deed. Moira smiled when she read them. Well, that closes the door on incapacity. I nodded, but didn't feel relieved. Just settled. We moved on to the next item. I signed the revocation of the gift deed, the one I'd filed 3 years ago, naming Bryce as future owner of the house. I'd done it after Tom passed, when I still believed in preparing blessings, not boundaries. Now, it felt like reclaiming a room I didn't realize I'd already left. We reviewed my life insurance policies next. Bryce's name was removed from both. I replaced him with the Desert Women's Relief Fund, same as the will. Moira glanced at me before notarizing the final form. Are you sure I'm too old to keep giving people chances just because I raised them? She didn't argue. Just stamped the page and slid it into a new folder labeled Finalized. The sound of that seal pressing down stayed with me. Something ending, not in anger, but in resolve. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting in the dry afternoon air. A part of me thought I'd cry when I got there. But the house felt lighter, not lonelier. I made tea, sat at the dining table, and looked around. Nothing had changed, but everything had shifted. The doorbell rang around 5. I opened it to find a plain envelope sitting on the step. No return address. Inside, a copy of the petition withdrawal, Bryce's signature at the bottom, sharp and angry. He'd backed off, but not quietly. It took less than 30 minutes. The judge was a tall man with a clipped voice and no patience for theatrics. He reviewed the documents with sharp eyes, barely glancing at the lawyers as they recited their parts. Moira spoke clearly, confidently, laying out the timeline and the evaluations. My name, my trailer, my choices. Across from us, Bryce avoided my gaze. His lawyer, young uncertain, fumbled through a binder trying to reframe everything as a concern for maternal well-being. When he brought up the will, suggesting it was made under distress or confusion, the judge leaned forward. Changing one's will, he said, isn't evidence of confusion. It's evidence of clarity. That was it. One sentence. A small stamp of the gavel followed. Case dismissed. Petition denied. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at Bryce as I stood. I simply gathered my bag, nodded to Moira, and walked out of the courtroom with my keys in my hand. Outside, the wind was picking up. There was dust in the air and I could hear traffic a block away. It felt like standing in a place that should have felt victorious, but didn't. I'd won. The law was on my side. But some part of me had cracked anyway. Back at home, I placed the court order on the mantel next to Tom's photo. His face looked calm, like always. I wondered what he would have said if he'd lived to see this, if he'd have believed Bryce could turn so easily. The phone rang. I let it ring out. 10 minutes later, it lit up again. Liana's number. She didn't leave a voicemail this time. Just a single message: I need to speak to you, just me. No Bryce. I stared at it for a long while, then typed back, tomorrow. Noon. Front porch. Then I turned off the ringer, drew the curtains, and sat in the quiet. The voicemail came just after dawn. I listened to it once, then saved it without replaying. Bryce's voice was calm, practiced. He said he was willing to withdraw everything, the legal mess, the bad press, even the threats if I reversed the insurance changes and transferred the house back. He said it like he was offering peace, but all I heard was a bargain dressed up as grace. I didn't respond. Later that morning, Liana Betty, as most people called her, rang the doorbell. She stood alone, her face drawn, tight hands gripping a thermos like a lifeline. I nodded and stepped aside. We sat on the porch where the air was cool and nothing had been taken yet. She spoke first. I didn't know he'd filed anything. I swear. I only found out when your name started coming up online. I didn't answer. I know you think I stood by, but I didn't know how bad it had gotten until after. And now, her voice cracked. Now everything's just burning. I looked at her carefully. Do you want me to fix it? She looked startled. I don't know. I'll reinstate everything I said evenly. The house, the insurance, the will, but only if you leave him. She flinched like I'd slapped her. That's cruel, she whispered. So was watching him take my home and call it care, I said. She didn't respond. Her hand trembled slightly on the thermos. I don't want revenge, I added. I want truth. And I want silence from him, from lawyers, from all of it. If you want a future tied to that man, that's your choice. But don't come here asking me to finance it. We sat in silence for a long while. Finally, she stood. I can't decide today, she said. I didn't ask you to, I replied. She nodded. Once, then walked down the steps, slower than she'd arrived. That evening, I pulled the for sale sign from the garage and laid it out on the grass. I listed the house the following Monday. The real estate agent asked if I was ready, and I told her yes, even though that wasn't the whole truth. Readiness doesn't always come before action. Sometimes you move first, and the certainty follows. I'd lived there for 22 years. Tom and I painted the walls ourselves. We built the garden bed that collapsed after his third spring gone. Bryce took his first steps on the hardwood floor, now covered in dull scratches from chairs that never got felt pads. It wasn't just a house, but it had stopped feeling like home. Packing was quieter than I expected. I didn't cry when I boxed up the wedding china. I didn't linger over old photographs. I kept what mattered and donated the rest. The day I signed the paperwork, I drove north. Taos had always been too far for a weekend, but just right for a beginning. I toured a little adobe house tucked between two cottonwoods with cracked flower pots and faded curtains that let in just enough light. It had one bedroom and a garden that needed work. I made an offer before sunset. Back home, the trailer sat exactly where Bryce had left it, unharmed, unopened. The tires needed air, and the side window had dust etched across it like fogged glass. But everything still worked. She was waiting for me. I spent that night loading the trailer like I'd planned months ago. Clothes maps, my binder of documents, a second pair of boots, and a small notebook with a single line written at the top. Places I still want to see. I left before sunrise. No note, no forwarding address, just a set of keys on the counter and a voicemail recording I erased without listening. My first stop was Monument Valley. I parked just before the light changed and walked out toward the edge. The wind met me there, low and steady. I stood still, then opened the door to my trailer, stepped inside, and started the engine. I parked at a canyon overlook just before the last of the sun slipped behind the ridge. The land stretched wide and silent, red earth deepening into shadow. I stepped out and let the air hit my face, dry, cool, steady. It didn't rush. It didn't ask. It just was. I set my phone on a small tripod, angled it toward the trailer behind me, and took a single photo. I stood straight. Not smiling, but not broken either. The cliffs behind me glowed faint orange, fading into soft blue. I looked at the picture once, then saved it. I didn't send it to anyone. It wasn't proof for anyone else. It was a record for me. Back inside the trailer, I made tea, lit a small lantern, and read a chapter from a book I'd packed months ago and hadn't touched until now. The silence wrapped around me like fabric stitched with distance and calm. Later that night, as I was climbing into bed, my phone buzzed. One message: "I hope you're proud of what you did." It was from Bryce. I stared at it for a moment, then turned off the screen. There was nothing left to say. Not because I didn't have words, but because he wasn't ready to hear them. Not then. Maybe not ever. Somewhere along the line, he'd convinced himself that what he wanted was owed, that what he could take would be forgiven, that I would fold again and again out of love or guilt or habit. But love without respect becomes something smaller, something sharp. And guilt is a door I no longer walk through. I lay back and closed my eyes. Outside, the desert was quiet. The road ahead was long, and tomorrow I'd move again, not to run, but to continue. I'd never expected to rebuild my life after 65, but now that I had, I intended to keep going. The trailer was mine, the road was mine, and whatever came next would be too.